Shabbat shalom, everyone. Shortly after I got ordained, my family and I moved to Las Vegas for me to start working as the associate rabbi of Temple Beth Shalom. And the first week that I started, my newly appointed mentor, Rabbi Felipe Goodman, he said, "Jonathan, welcome aboard. I'm glad that you're here. I'm going to Mexico for 2 weeks. So hold down the fort and call me if someone dies." And then he left. That was my introduction to the rabbinate. He left. And then, about an hour later, he called me from the airport and said, "Hey, Jonathan, by the way, there is a monthly meeting of Holocaust survivors that live here in town. I forgot to tell you, each month their meeting is held at one of the local synagogues, and this month they're having it at our shul. So please just be around on Wednesday, and if they need anything, give them whatever they want. They've been through enough." And I said, "Okay." And he paused, and then he chuckled and said, "Okay, good luck." And I said, What is that? What does that mean?" And he said, "Okay, I'll talk to you later," and laughed again and hung up. So fast forward to Wednesday of that week. Keep in mind, this is my first week. I walk by the social hall and peer in, and I see the Shoah survivors in there. They're sitting around a table, and they all look unhappy. Something is not right. So I approach them, offer a greeting, "Hello, good morning," yada, yada. And one guy stands up and he said, "Are you the new rabbi?" And I said, "Yes, hello, I'm Rabbi." But before I could finish my sentence, he points at the table and says, "Yeah, Rabbi, well, this is no good." And I was confused, and so like an idiot, I said, "The table's no good?" Didn't get it. And he said, "No, there's no coffee, there's no bagels, there's no lox, and there's no egg salad." And after he said that, another guy sitting at the table shouted, "And there's no herring either." Now, I went to rabbinical school, and I learned Bible and Talmud and how to bury someone and how to bar mitzvah a kid, but I didn't know anything about serving bagels and egg salad. In fact, because I had just started at this job, I didn't even know if we had that stuff in the shul. And if we had it, I had no idea where in the kitchen it was kept. But while I was thinking of all of this stuff, Rabbi Goodman's voice appeared in the back of my head. "Give them whatever they want. They've been through enough. I'm not going to disappoint a bunch of Holocaust survivors." So I paused. "I'm so sorry." And I told this very annoyed group of Shoah survivors that I would get them something. And I ran back into the kitchen, but I didn't know where anything was. So I just started putting out whatever random stuff I could find. Macaroons from Passover, there you go. Tuna fish from Saturday's bar mitzvah, mazel tov. I did find a weird jar of pickled herring at the very back of a shelf. I think it was canned in like 1926. I put that out too. I just started schlepping stuff from the kitchen into the social hall. Anything that I could find that I thought might make them happy, I just put it out. As I was doing this, I was casually listening to what they were saying, and I heard some of the stuff they were talking about, and it was not pleasant. They were talking about the camps and the Nazis and the deaths of loved ones. It was hard to hear. I had to remind myself that these people had survived one of the most terrible atrocities ever committed and human history, and here I was putting out nonsense. I put out kosher for Passover Coca-Cola, just because we had it around. Maybe they'll like that. Yeah. It was interesting. They were obviously confused by what I put out. They didn't understand my choice of refreshments. They obviously complained about the menu that was provided, but everyone ate it, and they ate lots of it. I finally had one of the ladies from the office help me track down more suitable food options, and then they ate all of that too. I had to admit, it was really strange watching them eat while simultaneously discussing the horrors of the Shoah almost nonchalantly. It was as if the food somehow helped them process the trauma that they had endured. Maybe the sweetness of the macaroons softened the blow. I don't know, but they kept eating. It turns out that this food sentiment is nothing new. And we actually see a similar situation in our Torah portion for the week, Parshat Vayeshev. This very popular Parsha begins with Joseph receiving a beautiful multicolored coat from his father Jacob and having dreams about his entire family bowing down to him. Well, wouldn't you know it, describing dreams where your family bows down to you doesn't make you very popular with your jealous older brothers who stripped him of his coat and threw him in a pit. In fact, let me read for you the play-by-play. I want to read you verse by verse from Genesis chapter 37 because I think this is fascinating, translated right from the Torah. Quote, "When Joseph came up to his brothers, they stripped Joseph of his tunic," the ornamented tunic that he was wearing. "They took him and cast him into the pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it." Okay? Are we good so far? Listen to what happens next. This is literally the next verse in the Torah. Quote, "Then they sat down to a meal. Looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead." Wait, what? They sat down to a meal? They sat down to a meal. They conspired against their own brother, stripped him, and then came up with a whole conspiracy theory about how he was killed by a wild animal. They practiced their pitch, then they threw him into a pit, and then they stopped to have lunch? Now, I must admit, I haven't thrown anyone into a pit lately. No, I'm just kidding. Never thrown anybody into a pit. But if I was going to, I don't think that kind of activity would stir up an appetite in me. I wouldn't want to eat a sandwich after I threw my brother into a pit. So why do Joseph's brothers eat after totally betraying their own flesh and blood? Well, Sforno, a medieval Italian rabbi and Torah commentator, says, quote, "They wanted to demonstrate that what they had done was no crime in their eyes, or that the incident was not something that should interfere with their regular meal. When righteous people become aware of having inadvertently committed a sin, they not only do not celebrate it by eating, but they impose a fast. Yet these brothers sat down to eat immediately after throwing Joseph into the pit, and this is clear evidence that in their minds they had certainly not committed anything wrong." I think that is a very, very interesting idea. Sforno is suggesting that the reason they ate was because they were aware that what they had done might be seen to others as controversial, but they themselves didn't think anything was wrong. And they wanted to prove that by doing a very normal thing, like eating a meal. Like the Holocaust survivors in Vegas, it's as if food somehow helped these brothers process the trauma that they themselves had just made. This is a phenomenon that I think is unique to Judaism. When something not normal happens, we eat a meal together. We're actually commanded to do so. For example, earlier today, just hours ago, we held a beautiful Brit Milah, a bris ceremony, in this very room, where a new Jewish boy received his name, Mazel Tov to Asher Mordechai, after he was publicly circumcised. Then we all ate a festive meal together afterwards. This is actually part of Jewish tradition. It's called Seudat Mitzvat. Now, a bris is a holy, beautiful event, but it's as if our tradition recognizes that this is not a normal custom, not something everybody does. So afterwards, we're commanded to eat together, and everybody eats some kugel and processes the event they just shared together. Oh, yeah, no kugel. So we got to call him up and revoke his name. Yeah. So too, when you go to a Shiva house, after someone has passed away, the community provides the mourners with a meal called Seudat Havra'ah. Why do we do this? Because we acknowledge that something irregular has happened. And we've got to do the most normal thing that human beings do, eat. By the way, most cultures and religions have similar practices with regard to food. But for Jews, this is seemingly the notion that defines our holidays and celebrations. They tried to kill us, we survived, let's eat. And when I think about this idea, honestly, I have to admit, I think it's beautiful because it is the most human reminder that life goes on. Not in a dismissive way, not in a get-over-it way, but in a grounding, gentle, compassionate way. When something disrupts our normal, whether it's a new baby entering the world or a loved one leaving it, Judaism anchors us back into our bodies, back into our community through the ordinary and simple act of just taking a bite. Friends, as I conclude this talk, I want you to think about your own lives for just a moment and think about the last time something big happened, good or bad. Maybe you got a difficult diagnosis, maybe your child got accepted into college, maybe you lost a job, maybe you retired, maybe you cared deeply for someone and maybe they moved away. Now think about that and think about what happened next. And I can almost guarantee you somewhere in that moment, somewhere in that change of events, especially if there is another Jew involved, someone in that moment said, come sit down and have something to eat. Maybe it was a neighbor who brought over dinner, or a friend that showed up with challah, or a family member that poured you a cup of tea. Maybe someone heated up soup. Maybe you went out to dinner somewhere. Someone gave you food, not because they thought that food could fix the situation, but because food could hold you until you could breathe again. This is the same instinct that Joseph's brothers had, distorted though they were. It's the same instinct those Shoah survivors had when they wanted coffee, bagels, and lox, and herring. Anything to soften the emotional weight of the stories they were sharing. Their eating wasn't denial, it was survival. It was their bodies saying, we're still here. Let's carry this together. And maybe that's really the point. Judaism understands that we as human beings are not designed to process life in insulation or on an empty stomach. We need each other. We need ritual. We need grounding. And sometimes grounding comes in the form of egg salad, or even stale macaroons schlepped from a synagogue kitchen by a panicked new rabbi. In a world where so much feels out of our control, where unexpected things happen constantly, where joy and heartbreak coexist almost daily, we all need places and people who say, sit, eat. You don't have to carry this alone. So maybe the question for each of us this Shabbat is this: where in your life do you need to be nourished right now? And where can you offer that nourishment to someone else? Because you never know, your phone call or your casserole, your invitation to coffee, your simple, come sit with me. That might be exactly what allows someone to keep going. And perhaps this is what Vayeshev is inviting us to learn. When life throws us into pits, or when we accidentally push someone else into one, or when we witness others struggling in theirs, the Jewish response is not to walk away, but to sit down, break bread, and begin repairing the world through one small, thoughtful act at a time. My dear friends, may we be the kind of community that shows up with presence, with love, and with food. Not because it fixes everything, but because it reminds us that we are never meant to face life's difficult moments alone. But just remember, if you show up to a Holocaust survivors meeting, you'd better bring herring. Shabbat shalom.